With your Working Virginia update, I'm Jesse Russell. Virginia families who rely on food assistance saw a cut in their federal benefits effective November 1st. Allison Burns reports.
Voices for Virginia's Children policy analyst Amy Woolard says that means Virginia families will see a reduction in benefits of about 5.5% or $36 a month for a family of 4.
So with benefits only equating to about $4 per day per person or about $1.40 per meal, that really means families and children will be struggling to make up several days' worth of meals each month heading into winter.
Woolard says most of the food stamp recipients in Virginia are children, the elderly, and disabled.
Food insecurity leads to greater risks for things like childhood obesity and other chronic conditions like asthma, anemia, pneumonia.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
What happens to prosecutors who intentionally ship people to prison for 25 years even though they know the defendant is innocent?
I'm Martin Espada, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Ken Anderson, the Texas former prosecutor and judge who decades ago convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. For 25 years, that judge and former prosecutor allowed Morton to languish in prison, even though he knew he had intentionally withheld from the defense evidence that proved Morton's innocence. For 25 years. 25 years. Unlike most of these cases, here, eventually, the prosecutor was found out. It's not newsworthy that a prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. It's the leading reason for wrongful convictions in America. But what is newsworthy is that here, something is actually going to happen to the prosecutor. In November, the judge, the former prosecutor, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for criminal contempt. 10 days compared to 25 years, and that's justice? Well, in a sense, yes. Because the answer to the question, what happens to police and prosecutors who intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence and cause innocent people to be sent to prison for decades and decades and perhaps life, generally speaking, the answer to the question, what happens to them, is nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union at aclu.org, because even in the Republic of Poetry, freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We've just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. Laborradio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch all afternoon. Joining us now, one of my favorites, Tina Dupuy. She is the editor-in-chief of thecontributor.com. You can find more of her work, her syndicated column, at Tina Dupuy. That's DUPUY.com. Follow her on Twitter and everything else. Tina, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Karl.
So last time we had you on the show, we talked about your column concerning the poor shaming of America, which is essentially trying to make those who are, the working poor, the working class, seem as if they are morally less than the rest of us because of some reason, and that's why they're poor. I wanted to get your reaction to this article that I read on Dan Savage's blog, The Slog, over at The Stranger in Seattle, about a young Starbucks employee, I don't know if you saw this, who was living on food stamps like many people that work in that the fast food industry. And he was fired for eating one of the sandwiches that Starbucks threw away at the end of the day. When they mark things as, we can't sell these anymore, they've expired, whatever. He grabbed one out of the trash and ate it, and a week later he was fired. What does it say about the way we value workers in this country that a young man who is trying to do what's right, he's 21 years old working at Starbucks, but not making enough, and he's working almost full-time. They keep you just below full-time so that you don't accrue benefits. He's working his tail off, working almost full-time, but still can't afford enough money to pay for food, so he's eating out of the garbage, and his employer fires him as a result, saying that he was stealing from the company food that they had already thrown away.
Right, because we'd also like to waste food before feeding our employees. This is, and what kind of keeps these measures in place is that, it's kind of framed that this guy was stealing instead of Starbucks is being subsidized by taxpayers by not paying their people enough, giving them enough hours to where they don't qualify for food stamps. It's really framed the wrong way. When we talk about Walmart and we talk about the Walmart heirs and how they own, I think it's like 40% of the wealth of the 99%. It's ridiculous. These people are more wealthy than they could possibly ever imagine, what have you. And the fact that they have been benefiting in every measurable way from government subsidies, that they're not only can you qualify for Medicaid in some states, but you can qualify for food stamps. If you are raising a family, if you have children and you work full-time at minimum wage, you qualify for food stamps. because you can't feed yourself, you can't feed your family. So we have been kind of taught to believe that personal responsibility means that if you don't like your job and you're poor, you should just get a better job. And if you don't get a better job, it's really on you, because you're the one who's decided to work at McDonald's. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these places, and if you talk to people who live in these kind of depressed towns, Youngstown would be a great example to look at. They're in the news because there's a new study out that all of the earthquakes that have happened to Youngstown are as a direct result of fracking. But Youngstown had like a 25% unemployment rate in the 80s, when everybody else was being raised up, right? When everybody else was having a boom.
When Ronald Reagan was carrying us all on his broad shoulders.
Correct. Youngstown was depressed. So if you live in a town where there are no jobs, or the only jobs that you can get are jobs where you have to stand for 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and you're not able to do that physically, you can't do better for yourself, period. And so we kind of have been framing this discussion that, like, people just they want to be poor. They're not smart enough, as Romney would say, to get a loan from their parents to go to college.
Right. Well, and towards the end of...
We've made it on the individual instead of on a system that's completely rigged against them.
Well, and the natural extension of this poor shaming, there's this story in Talking Points memo I wanted to get your reaction to. Just to give people an idea of what it's about. It says, the main takeaway from an exhaustive new study of premiums on the Obamacare health insurance marketplaces, they're generally going to be lower than expected, undercutting the persistent claims of, quote, rate shock by conservatives. Now, before I get your response to the news that surprise, it's going to be even, insurance is going to cost even less than we thought it was going to cost. People without health insurance, they get poor shamed too, right?
Well, yeah, people without health insurance aren't being responsible in buying health insurance. Plus, according to conservatives, they can just go to the ER to get health insurance, which is, not only ridiculously expensive, and we all have to pay for that.
But it's also only for emergencies.
Healthcare. It's also for emergencies. I mean, if you go in there with a non-life-threatening condition, say, a migraine or something that you would need health care for, something that you need to go to a doctor for, they will turn you away and have turned people away for the inability to pay. It's only if you're bleeding, are they required by law to actually give you health care. But I think the important thing, and I think we kind of miss this a lot of the time, Carl. There are people who are still upset at the income tax. There are people who are still upset and will never respect Social Security. Ayn Rand, for example, was apoplectic at the idea of Social Security as she was enjoying that in her latter years.
Oh, God bless her. I mean, she was an atheist too.
To use her phrase, writing books doesn't pay that well. So, we also subsidized Ayn Rand. Which I think is poetic, much unlike Ayn Rand. It's actually poetic. Anyway, so I think that as we talk about the benefits of Obamacare, I think that's what really the right wing is afraid of, that people will actually like it, and they're basically decent reforms. There are also Republican reforms. I think that we should have a single-payer health care plan. I think that's much more cost-effective. I think that a marketplace-based plan will never be as cost-effective as it should be or could be.
It's a giant step in the right direction, though.
It is a step in the right direction, but it is not a cure-all. I don't
No,
think the individual
no, and
Heritage Foundation.
The one time I thought Republicans were intellectually honest was during the debate over health care. The only time that they were intellectually honest is when they said, Democrats only want to give you this plan because you'll get hooked and you'll think that you're entitled to health care. Yes, actually, yes.
Yes.
Precisely.
That's what I say about poor shaming. It's like if we make people feel bad about themselves, then they won't ask their country for more. And that's the bottom line. I mean, there are more people living in poverty in this country than there are Canadians in this world. We have about 40 million people in.
Not that we want more Canadians, just to be clear.
That is correct. But there are a lot. There are kind of gobsmackingly huge amount of people in this very rich country, still rich country, who live, in pretty squalid conditions. And so if we can make those people just feel like it's their fault, and it's not that they were, that you now get to be king the same way you get to be in the middle class by virtue of birth. If we can make those people feel bad about themselves, then they won't actually ask the government to do anything about their situation, which is, Bill de Blasio, who's now the front runner in the Democratic mayoral race. Our election, of course, is Tuesday.
Right.
He said, I was at a meet and greet with him, and he said, the one thing that FDR didn't say was, we're going to help you as soon as the economy gets better.
Well, thank goodness he didn't.
And his populist kind of message has really resonated with New Yorkers, and especially liberal New Yorkers.
And we're going to be talking about the campaigns there. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. Public advocate, mayor, city council races. We're going to be talking with some folks later on this program about that. Tina, before I let you go, I wanted to encourage people to go to your website, tinadupuy.com, and read your column. We're running out of time, or else we would have touched on it. The Creationist with an iPhone Paradox. You'll laugh your tail off. Tina, thanks for joining us.
You're the best, Carl.
Alrighty, so follow Tina Dupuy on Twitter and Facebook at Tina Dupuy. Go to her website, tinadupuy.com, sign up for her email alerts, and check out her latest columns. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. Coming up next, we'll talk to Congressman Alan Grayson about the situation in Syria. Stick around.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam, because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp.
I want to talk to my lawyer!
Get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If
you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunity.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. All weekend, I'm Karl Frisch. So, as of today, I have been a non-smoker for 165 days, 1 hour and 51 minutes. That's as of the recording of this show. And one of the things that I've been positively obsessed with since I quit smoking is lung health. And in all its shapes and sizes, or all the iterations of the issue. And, you know, it had been at least 15 years since Gary Fox noticed signs of black lung disease. It started with shortness of breath, then a cough that yielded black mucus. By 1999, his symptoms convinced him to apply for federal benefits. A doctor certified by the U.S. Department of Labor examined him and diagnosed the most severe form of the disease, known as complicated coal workers' pneumocystis. The government ordered his employer, a subsidiary of the behemoth Massey Energy Company, to begin paying him monthly benefits. But as is almost always the case, the company appealed. Here to talk with me now is Chris Hamby, a reporter for the Center for Public Integrity, who collaborated with ABC News on a year-long investigation into the coal industry's handling of black lung claims. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, when the coal industry appeals these types of decisions, how often are they successful in winning their appeals?
Well, we don't have good data on that, how often they win on appeal, but we know that at the initial level, the victory rate for miners is about 14% in the 2012 fiscal year, and that was actually up from what it has been in years.
Meaning that the industry is successful in 86% of the cases?
That's right. And then of those 14% that they win, very often, most if not all the time, they will be appealed by the coal company and they will go to an administrative law judge, and that's when a lot of the evidence is really developed, and the coal company can enlist all these their experts and really litigate this a lot. And we don't have the numbers on that. The DOL does not keep that information.
So what is their defense then? What do they say? That they're not responsible for black lung, that it just spontaneously happens in these people?
Well, if you're going to make a black lung claim, you have to prove, one, that you have black lung, two, that it was caused by your work in the mines, three, that you're totally disabled, and four, that you're totally disabled because of your black lung. So you can attack them on any one of those 4 points. And lawyers are very successful in doing that for coal companies. And what a lot of times happens is they're able to concede that a miner may have black lung, but they're not totally disabled by it. Or they're totally disabled, but the real cause is smoking or something else.
So tell us about the case of Gary Fox then. How did his case play out?
Right. His case was a particularly striking example because what happened with him is that he, like many miners, was not able to find a lawyer because lawyers just sort of fled this area because the payoff is not very big and your chances of winning are not very good, and you're not allowed to charge anything until the case is finally over, and then you have to fight the coal company for your fees. So Gary and his wife were taking on a subsidiary of Massey Energy by themselves, and specifically a lawyer at this major, probably the preeminent defense firm for federal black lung cases known as Jackson Kelly. And what had happened to him was that he presented evidence, like most minors, from his treatment records and from his exam that's sponsored by the Labor Department, which the Labor Department pays for, and you can select from a list of doctors that they've approved. Now, Massey and Jackson Kelly working for them went out and obtained other medical opinions, and among those other medical opinions that they obtained were Gary Fox had 2 years before he filed benefits had a lung procedure where he had part of his lung removed, and they were just trying to rule out cancer. There was no indication that the doctors were looking for black lung or even knew that he was a coal miner. But Jackson Kelly ended up getting the slides of those tissues and sending them to two of their expert pathologists who were typically support their case. And those two pathologists both wrote reports saying that the tissue was consistent with complicated black lung, which would automatically qualify Gary.
And folks should know, I mean, oftentimes industry has a group of people or even these, for hire entities that sound like official sounding independent organizations that they will constantly send these types of things to, knowing that they're going to get the results they want.
And there is definitely a reliable stable that they have.
But in this case, they didn't get what they wanted.
They did not get the result that they were hoping for with the results, and it would have been very, very difficult for them to win the case with those results in the records, so they simply withheld them. And instead sort of built their case around the hospital pathologist report, which was really just meant to rule out cancer and didn't really address the issue of black lung at all. But it was clear from the judge's decision and from all the other doctors in the case that was taken as the key piece of evidence in defeating the claim. And as a result, Gary Fox had to go back to work for more than 5 more years. And by the time he was finally able to get out, he was so sick that he needed a lung transplant, and he died waiting on that transplant.
Well, how did we ultimately find out that these slides had been investigated and that they'd been withheld from the judge and Gary Fox's team?
This only came out because Gary in 2007, when he filed his second claim in late 2006, and in early 2007, he was able to get in touch with, just by chance, this lawyer who works out of his home in rural southern West Virginia, but who has experience going up against Jackson Kelly and knows the sort of some of their practices of withholding evidence in some of these cases, and was immediately suspicious of this case, and so really pushed for the firm to have to turn over any information it was withholding, and it was a lengthy fight. The firm filed numerous appeals to try and stop this as the case was ongoing, and they conceded the case to try and prevent discovery of these materials, but ultimately they had to turn over those 2 reports that were generated 8 years earlier, and they showed that there was strong evidence all along that he had the most severe form of black lung, and he finally won his case, and then a few months later he died.
Well, is this why the one judge called it a long-standing pattern of misconduct on the part of Jackson Kelly?
Well, we don't know exactly what the judge was commenting on in that email that I got, but what the article goes through is that, yes, this does appear to be a pattern by the firm over a period of time, and that's documented in cases dating back to the early 90s or even earlier. And it should be noted that the firm has never said that they don't do this. Their argument is simply that there's nothing wrong with doing this. And that's the argument that they're pursuing to this day in front of a federal circuit court of appeals.
Absolutely fascinating. Chris Hamby, staff writer at the Center for Public Integrity. You can read his report at publicintegrity.org. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and coming up, we're going to be talking to Heather Cronk about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act and some of the big news in the fight for full equality and simple human dignity for the LGBT community that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We'll be back after this.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. So, the U.S. Senate this week passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. with 64 votes in favor and only 32 votes against. That includes all of the Senate Democrats and 10 Senate Republicans. Joining us now to talk about this, some of the other successes that the LGBT community has had over the last couple weeks, is our good friend from Get Equal, Heather Cronk. Heather, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me.
All right. So before we get into the good, I want to get into the bad. Because, a lot of our allies in the straight world have no idea some of the things that LGBT people face. We're fighting for marriage equality, so they assume that we can't get fired simply because of who we love, or that we can't be denied a rental apartment or a lease on an office space because of who we love. But just so people have the facts handy, gay people like me can only get legally married right now in 14 states and Washington, D.C., but very soon 16 states. Gay people like me can be fired in 29 states based simply on who I love and not for the quality of their work. On that score, the number of states sanctioning discrimination is even worse for transgender people. They are only protected in 17 states. Stable, law-abiding same-sex couples in 32 states are forbidden from jointly adopting children and denied the right to adopt the sons and daughters of their partner in an equally unfortunate number of states. Students who identify or are perceived as LGBT remain vulnerable to state-sanctioned discrimination by their teachers and public schools in 36 states, while 33 members of our quote-unquote more perfect union have no statewide programs protecting them from bullying. When it comes to renting a home, people like me can be denied a lease simply for being gay in 29 states, and again, the numbers are even worse for the transgender community. While hospitals accepting Medicare and Medicaid are currently barred from denying visitation to same-sex partners as a result of a mandate issued by President Obama, 26 states have no laws guaranteeing such simple human dignity should the edict ever be rescinded by a future president. And as we know, some hospitals don't follow those rules anyways. So, Heather, here we are, and the Senate passes the Employment Non-Discrimination Act by a rather large margin, but not without some controversy. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we were really excited to see the Senate finally take up and pass this bill, which is actually the first time that they voted on this bill since 1996. So the last time the Senate took action on this bill, Macarena was the number one hit single on the radio, which that should tell you something. So we were excited to see them take it up, but the problem with the version of the bill that they passed is that distinct from other pieces of civil rights legislation, like the Civil Rights Act, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, this piece of legislation, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, actually has far broader religious exemptions than ever seen in a piece of civil rights legislation before. So we were excited to see, forward movement from the Senate. Get Equal is really concerned about the kind of precedent that sets. And basically the assertion that the Senate was making that not just religious institutions like churches and synagogues, but religiously affiliated institutions like hospitals and universities actually have exemption from the law. So, the Senate passed a bill that said actually it's cool for universities and hospitals to still continue to discriminate.
So it's kind of a half a step forward and a half a step back.
That's right. And the other thing that it does, that the religious exemptions does as a precedent, is also hurt our friends and allies in the reproductive justice movement who have been fighting these same kinds of religious exemptions for years.
Well, it's not.
We're
It's
currently seeing that play out in the court system.
Perhaps even further than that, it also hurts the marriage equality fight. When you consider that folks are trying for all kinds of exemptions there. And to what point does it end if people are going to have these religious conscious disputes? Could somebody who has an STD or whatever be denied treatment by a hospital or whatever? I mean, at a certain point, if we know that the House is not going to be voting on this anytime soon, didn't we have an opportunity to get the legislation right and passed in the Senate?
I think that's absolutely right. And the really frustrating part of that is that Democrats went in with this version of the bill. This wasn't the compromise. This was the starting point. And so our pushback on the religious exemptions was partially a content pushback, right? We wanted to make sure that media was paying attention to this, and that the LGBT community was paying attention to this, and really kind of look at the content of the bill. But it's also a problem with precedent, that now we're looking at ways that the radical right, the radical religious right, can actually then use this as precedent in much more far-reaching bills and efforts to kind of solidify discrimination into law. For me, it's particularly poignant to be looking at a bill that writes discrimination into a non-discrimination bill.
Right. So meanwhile, you've got people like Speaker Boehner saying that the legislation is unheard of because it's so vague and makes it possible for people to sue, which is the whole point. But at the same time, it's unprecedented because, like you said, it provides for an avenue of discrimination in a piece of anti-discrimination law. When people were fighting the civil rights pushes in the 50s and 60s, they often made religious claims to advance their bigoted opinions. And religious folks were not granted any sort of out on religious grounds when it came to discrimination against people of color, were they?
Well, and that was actually the most striking thing as part of this conversation, that Julian Bond, the former head of the NAACP,
right,
and a civil rights warrior, wrote an op-ed in the Politico, back a couple of months ago, saying exactly that, saying these religious exemptions are the exact same religious exemptions that folks were trying to write into the Civil Rights Act in 64 and in 74, and we resisted them every time. And we should do the same thing in this bill. And I found that particularly moving.
Okay, so let's move on to sunnier topics. There has been good news. You have the state of Illinois and the state of Hawaii both passing marriage equality through their legislatures and on to the governor. Hard-fought wins, right?
Well, those are especially hard-fought wins. I mean, Illinois came down to, the skin of their teeth. And Hawaii has actually been fighting this fight for 20 years.
Well, they were
Hawaii was
the first
state to take this up. And there have been folks, organizers on the ground for the last 2 decades, trying to not just win this fight. It's not just about winning the fight, but they've been working for 2 decades to have the same dignity and respect that their neighbors do. And my heart went out to all those folks who I know have been working for a really long time on that.
Well, and, for folks that don't know, 20 years ago, the Hawaii Supreme Court basically said you can't treat people differently. And the way that the state dealt with it was by passing a state initiative that basically said that the legislature could decide who gets to be married. Now, that's exactly what the legislature did decide in this legislation. But of course, right-wingers tried to take it to court saying, no, what the initiative actually meant was that they can only allow marriages between one man and one woman. But they were just laughed out of court, right?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I remember actually, I grew up in the South and I went to college in the South, and I remember talking about this in one of my English classes in college in the South, and it blew my mind. I mean, Hawaii was really on the front edge of this, and that was really my introduction into what culture wars look like.
Well, and, I keep on telling people, if you're my generation, 35 years old, the idea that you would one day be able to get married is so bizarre, because it didn't enter my consciousness until the case in Hawaii either. But then even when it did enter my consciousness, it was kind of like a peripheral thing, like, yeah, okay, buddy. Yeah, we'll be able to get married someday.
Yeah, and kudos to the folks who have been, fighting this for even longer than 20 years. I mean, the folks at Lambda Legal, the folks at Marriage Equality USA have been doing this grassroots work for decades.
Well, and there was a case out of Minnesota in 1973.
That's right. And, I think that speaks to not just the powerful narrative of recognizing love and not just government recognition of love, but, your neighbor and your family and your church, all of those pieces of the community coming together and validating a relationship, I think is just so powerful.
Well, and once the law goes into effect in Hawaii, once the law goes into effect in Illinois, some 38% of Americans will live in a state where marriage equality is the law of the land. And now in Missouri, we have to go in just a minute, but in Missouri, the governor, Jay Nixon, has said that the state will begin to recognize same-sex marriages performed in other jurisdictions for the purposes of state income tax since ENDA has been struck, or since DOMA has been struck down. That's also big news. So we're getting to the point where culturally we've hit a tipping point, and things are going to be changing very quickly for some time.
And it's actually the Missouri ruling is, talk about how this really impacts people. One of our friends and fellow organizers, Jimmy Grunder, and his partner, Paul Roark, just moved to Missouri about a year ago. They're literally getting married today, and that news came out yesterday. They went to Iowa to get married. They're going back to Missouri. This is going to change their lives.
All righty. So I think if anybody's listening out there, that they now know that marriage equality is moving forward yet again. The National Organization for Marriage is on its heels, but there's still a great deal of work to be done. Just to emphasize the point, gay and lesbian and bisexual people, or people that are even perceived to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual, can be fired in 29 states simply because of who they are or who they are perceived to be. Trans people can be fired are only protected from being fired in 17 states in this country. So we've got a lot of work to do. And hopefully, when we have a more amenable House of Representatives, we'll be able to get a clean ENDA bill through. Heather Kronk with the great folks at Get Equal, thanks for joining us. And where can people visit you all online?
Yeah, you can see us on our website at getequal.org. We're also on Facebook at Get Equal and Twitter at Get Equal. So definitely stop by and get involved.
Alrighty. Thanks a lot, Heather. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. The key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are federal student aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Marins, and I'm here to talk to you about Take Action News with David Shuster. Every week we talk politics, government, and what you can do to take action. David Shuster talks with today's leading political minds.
Valerie, so many people will know your name, know your story because of those dastardly actions by the Bush administration to try to discredit your husband, who called them out for their lies that led up to the Iraq War. And in so going after him, they leaked your name. 10 years since the start of the Iraq War. Has your perspective on any of this changed? Do you still carry around any sort of anger or frustration to the Bush administration? How have you been dealing with it all these years?
Until the right is able to come to terms with the reality that we were lied into this war, and it was not a good idea, and it wasn't to liberate the Iraqi people. They will just continue to live in, la-la land and perpetuate the lies that got us into the war in the first place.
Tune in from noon to 3 p.m. every Saturday, right here on We Act Radio.
When our daughter Ava was 4, we noticed she didn't talk much. A genetic test revealed that she had hearing loss caused by 2 mutated genes. One she inherited from myself, the other from her dad. If it weren't for the amazing people at U of M, we might have never known the true cause of Ava's hearing loss or how to properly treat it.
The University of Michigan C.S. Mott Children's Hospital is one of only a handful of hospitals in the world researching genetic hearing loss in addition to treating it. Our breakthrough research and advanced treatments combined with outstanding care help us change children's lives in extraordinary ways. For the leaders and best in pediatric care, call a Mott Patient Advisor at 877-475-MOTT or visit mottchildren.org.
She is more talkative now and more social. She loves music now. She's humming to the music, and it's sweet to actually hear her humming.
To learn more, call 877-475-MOTT.
They not only helped us find answers, they helped Ava find her voice.
That's the Michigan difference.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News, 47 after. As we finish up the show, I wanted to get you some news that broke at the end of the week. Rather fascinating and really great news. The Supreme Court of New Jersey announced that it will not issue a stay as it considers an appeal to Supreme Court Justice Jacobson's historic ruling affirming marriage equality. On Monday, marriage licenses will start being issued for same-sex couples in New Jersey. Gay equality is not necessarily a shall, marriage equality, but as this happens, etc. If you poll voters, the perplexing demographic problems that plague the Republican Party and how they're actually turning on their own of late is a friend of the show, Cliff Schechter. Cliff, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Carl.
So that great news out of New Jersey kind of underscores the plague that's within the Republican Party, right? I mean, Republicans have kissed off their abilities with women and with independents because of the way they position themselves on issues. And it's not because of the issues themselves. It's because it makes them look dated, antiquated, out of touch, and just bigoted.
Sure, and sadly, they are most of those things, right. Or at least the people who are pushing them. You know, they seem to have this sort of goal to get older, whiter, fatter, and more rural all the time.
Well, and it's as if, at least when it comes to issues like marriage equality or climate change, when these issues are denied by conservatives, and it makes them look insane to independents, moderates, women, it's as if they're saying, we propose legislation that will travel the earth to determine whether or not it's flat or round. I mean, that's the kind of eyeballs that you would get for saying something anti-gay from these voters, and yet it persists. These problems persist, and the Republican Party will continue to hurt and hemorrhage until it changes now or changes later. And they're going to have to hurt to do both of those.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is they can hurt in the short term, which would probably happen because they'll have a bunch of their older, angrier base that won't accept gay marriage, that won't accept women's rights to reproductive equality, won't accept that people don't think you should be able to get a semi-machine gun just because you feel like it.
Right.
Other issues that sort of split us demographically at this point, where you've got younger non-white women, mostly growing urban, suburban people who are literally, the numbers are growing to the point where you're getting to, on a lot of these issues, 70% plus in agreement. So to some degree in the short term, they have to deal with their base and it would hurt, but at least they'd be looking to the long term of being a viable party. And instead, all they're doing is turning inward. And look at the silliness. I mean, when you're trying to fix your image, the debt ceiling debacle and everything that going around the last couple of weeks, Ted Cruz screaming about how it's going to lead to the end of the country as we know it, Michelle Bachmann.
End of times.
I mean, this is not the stuff that makes moderate suburban voters say, hey, I think that's a party I want to get with,
Right. Well, let alone young people that are going to be an even larger pool of the voting population. So there's this great piece at Daily Kos that kind of points to the other piece of this, the other side of the coin, which is must be equally frightening for Republicans consultants as they look at numbers. So if you know that your constituency is like octogenarian, white, mostly male Fox News viewers, you probably want to avoid targeting the things that they like about government.
Yeah, you would think so. And the irony is that you've got Republicans who seem to be going out of their way to try to take a whack at Social Security and Medicare, which is a way they can actually alienate one of the last groups that likes them at this point. Old people, but they're doing it. They just,
it's like they're doing everything they can to squander the institutional advantage they have in the House. They gerrymandered to a point where they should be able to hold on to the House regardless of demographic trends for a good 20 years.
That's right.
But it's like they're doing everything they can, tripping over themselves to screw that up.
Well, and they're doing it because, it would take a way of election for them to lose the House, and now that's building. I mean, we're a year away, and that's a long time in politics, cliche.
I'm not willing to say that it would happen in 2014, but I can see a scenario where we get halfway there in 2014, and with Hillary Clinton on the ballot against somebody that has to placate the Ted Cruz type base of the party, perhaps even Ted Cruz.
Perhaps him, yes.
She could carry Texas. She could carry,
Arizona,
40 states.
Yeah, a bunch of these states that are especially swing states that are trending in a Democratic direction. No, you're absolutely right, and I'm not ready to say it'll happen in 2014 yet either. But guys that are pretty careful about this stuff, that are pretty what we call conservative in the old sense, not in the lunatic sense now, but in the sense
careful
of being right. Yeah. Charlie Cook and Stu
Rothenberg, right?
That are even starting to say that this could happen because when you start seeing numbers where the Democrats have a generic ballot advantage of 8 points, and it really should take around 6 points for them to be able to take back the House, you're now looking at a situation where in districts where you have a +5 Republican lead, for example, +6 Republican, advantage, they could lose. And you start looking at South Dakota, where everybody had just written that off and was like, well, our guy Tim Johnson is retiring. A former Daschle staffer is running with not out huge name recognition. They've got a former popular governor or popular governor in Mike Rounds. And a poll just came out and showed it's about a 5 or 6 point race now because Mike Rounds is being associated with the crazy party in Washington. His numbers have tanked. So if these guys don't have to put money into winning South Dakota, that should tell you something about where they are.
Well, it'll be the umpteenth Senate elections that they failed to get the majority. And in 2016, with Hillary potentially on the ballot and with better states for us to be running for the Senate in.
Think about it for a second, Carl, which is Hillary Clinton, or certainly a strong Democrat at the top who wins big, and now they've got all these guys who were elected in 2010 during a Republican wave with Koch money before Democrats decided to understand Citizens United. People like Ron Johnson in Wisconsin and Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania and Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, who are way too conservative for those places. And a bunch of the people I just mentioned, including Toomey and Johnson, decided to go ahead and vote to allow us
keep the government shut down and hit the debt ceiling. Right.
So good luck defending those votes in center-left states when the time comes.
Right. Not only that, there's always the surprises, and those people could still be primaried. That's how crazy these people are. Tina Dupuy does a good job of comparing this to the Whigs. The Whigs went the way of the dodo bird because of the know-nothings in Congress, and now we've got the know-nothing, do-nothings in Congress.
Well, they're right, because the Northern Whigs who thought slavery maybe was a bad idea were not pure enough for the Southern Whigs. And it seems that that's always it. It's always the Southern right-wingers. Nobody can be pure enough for them, so they kill themselves over and over again. Sort of a recurring theme in U.S. history.
And this preoccupation that the right seems to have with not being conservative enough. It's funny that the folks that they always identify as being the touchstones, they're not even conservative enough. They're all Southern, with the exception of a very few.
Right. Well, now look, Mitch McConnell's not Southern, not conservative enough now. Thad Cochran, they just announced that 3 of these crazy groups like DeMint's former group, the Senate Conservatives Fund, and some of these other ones are going to support somebody running against Cochran, in as if he who votes right wing on virtually everything isn't right wing enough because he didn't vote to blow up the economy. They keep moving the baseline on how pure you have to be. Already you had to hate Obama, think he was from Kenya, believe that supply side economics works, global warming isn't happening, gays are evil, guns are the best thing in the world, and the rest. But now it's moved over further too. If you're not willing to blow up your own economy to sort of stick your tongue out at the other side, then you're not pure enough. So
well,
where that baseline will move to next.
We've got like 2 minutes left. What do you think of, after the 2012 election, the base was shocked. We thought the polls were skewed. Karl Rove and Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all of the conservative media said we were going to win and that Romney was going to pick up seats in the Senate, and none of that happened. We're not going to support you anymore. And now we've told, they were told for the last, 6 months, we're going to repeal Obamacare, and we can do it. We can repeal or defund Obamacare. And they got nothing out of the shutdown. When do they stop giving money to these people?
Well, never. That's kind of the sad thing, or it depends who you're talking about. If you're talking about the rich sort of Wall Street side, they've already gotten pissed now and threatened their own party, and we'll have to see if they actually do what they say they're going to do. But, a lot of those guys could have lost a lot of money had this thing not gone down the way it did and had we gone over the debt ceiling. And so maybe some of them will be pissed. Certainly I've heard of against old Cantaloupe calves, Steve King. They're supporting a more sort of Chamber of Commerce type in a primary. They're talking about doing that in other places. So maybe they will try to reassert themselves that way. But in terms of the small donors, this is all just a con. They're going to keep giving money. The Tea Party, the types of the Tea Party makes all of their money off that. Sarah Palin gets rich off of these dupes, with the same people that get these emails, that I've got money for you in a Nigerian bank, or I've got a cure for cancer. I mean, sadly, this is the least educated segment of our society who gets fooled very easily. They believe what they hear from Fox News and Rush Limbaugh.
They bought their survival seeds and their gold and everything else.
And they can't afford it, but they're going to keep giving $10 a month or $50 a month or whatever they can afford, so that Sarah Palin, and I'm sure in a few years from now, Ted Cruz, when he gets his own radio show or TV show on Fox, can be rich at their expense while they remain poor and angry. And it's a shame, really. It really is.
Well, at some point we need to stop asking what's the matter with Kansas and say what's the matter with, Republicans in this country. Because they must see this happening. I mean, Michelle Bachmann is leaving for scandal just like Palin did, and she's going to make a fortune doing it.
Oh, I mean, look at the Huckabee model.
Well, I mean, the Huckabee model is a good example. He's made a killing. He keeps flirting with running for president. He's never going to do it. Cliff Schechter, we'll get back into these crazy Republicans at some other point, but it's been a good week of the show. Cliff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Carl. All
right, this is Take Action News. Special thanks to Pete and Troy on the controls. Stick around next week. We'll have another great edition of Take Action News, and we welcome you to join us and have it with us. Have a good one.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
With your Working Virginia update, I'm Jesse Russell. Virginia families who rely on food assistance saw a cut in their federal benefits effective November 1st. Allison Burns reports.
Voices for Virginia's Children policy analyst Amy Woolard says that means Virginia families will see a reduction in benefits of about 5.5% or $36 a month for a family of four.
So with benefits only equating to about $4 per day per person or about $1.40 per meal, that really means families and children will be struggling to make up several days' worth of meals each month heading into winter.
Woolard says most of the food stamp recipients in Virginia are children, the elderly, and disabled.
Food insecurity leads to greater risks for things like childhood obesity and other chronic conditions like asthma, anemia, pneumonia.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
What happens to prosecutors who intentionally ship people to prison for 25 years even though they know the defendant is innocent?
I'm Martin Espada, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Ken Anderson, the Texas former prosecutor and judge who decades ago convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. For 25 years, that judge and former prosecutor allowed Morton to languish in prison, even though he knew he had intentionally withheld from the defense evidence that proved Morton's innocence. For 25 years. 25 years. Unlike most of these cases, here, eventually, the prosecutor was found out. It's not newsworthy that a prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. It's the leading reason for wrongful convictions in America. But what is newsworthy is that here, something is actually going to happen to the prosecutor. In November, the judge, the former prosecutor, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for criminal contempt. 10 days compared to 25 years, and that's justice? Well, in a sense, yes. Because the answer to the question, what happens to police and prosecutors who intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence and cause innocent people to be sent to prison for decades and decades and perhaps life, generally speaking, the answer to the question, what happens to them, is nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union at aclu.org, because even in the Republic of Poetry, freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown. Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty. Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We've just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. LaborRadio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit LaborRadio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Welcome back. Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. So, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York has introduced legislation intended to curb military sexual assault, primarily by removing commanding officers' authority to determine whether assault accusations merit a hearing. The Military Justice Improvement Act would give military lawyers the right to evaluate these types of claims. Zoe Carpenter of The Nation wrote a fantastic piece this week exploring some of the dissenting views within the Department of Defense, and importantly, the strict norm of supporting the military's hierarchy. Zoe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I know that there are competing pieces of legislation in the Senate. Can you tell us a bit about that and the movement behind Senator Gillibrand's view of how this should be dealt with?
Sure. So in response to revelations that last year there were 26,000 cases of sexual assaults in the military, but only 3,400 were reported, there have been a variety of proposals to reform the military justice system to try to encourage more reporting while clamping down on the problem. So some of those things have broad support from Republicans and Democrats and are likely to sail through with the Defense Authorization Act. Things like limiting the ability of commanders to overturn jury convictions and having a civilian review of a commander's decision not to prosecute cases that he was advised to prosecute. However, there's a split, which is not along party lines, over Gillibrand's proposal, which is, as you said, to take commanders' authority away when it comes to prosecuting these cases. And she has received strong opposition from top Democrats on the Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin and Claire McCaskill, who are otherwise supportive of other reforms for the justice system, and also from the top brass at the Pentagon. They're opposed to this reform as well. Advocates say that this reform is really the most critical piece of all of these different changes to the system because right now victims have to report directly to their commanders when there's a crime against them, and that leads to serious conflicts of interest and more retaliation, Gillibrand argues.
So how does the current system fail victims of sexual assault?
In so many ways. The overturning jury convictions was one big way. Before, commanders could, the juries would hand down a guilty verdict, and the commanders would just throw that out, and the accused would return to normal service. Retaliation, victims who come forward and report crimes against them, for 25% of those survivors, they're attackers in the chain of command. So if they report to their commander, who then, has a relationship with the accused, that can lead to serious conflicts of interest and then this climate of retaliation. So victims have really been coming forward to say that they don't feel like there's an atmosphere where they can receive justice.
Well, and you have a quote in your piece from an Air Force JAG officer. It's, we're constantly told in staff meetings and other meetings that we need to fight this, that if Gillibrand's proposal is passed, it will destroy the system. There's never an opportunity to give a contrary opinion. What did this person mean by that?
My source is speaking to I think a really undercovered area of this debate is that it's been framed in the media as a fight between Gillibrand and McCaskill and between survivors advocates on one side and the military on the other, because the military brass who have been testifying in Congress have been uniformly opposed to this amendment. But what my source was getting at, and he's a senior officer in the Air Force, is that there actually is support for this kind of reform within the ranks. Even commanders believe that justice will best be achieved by empowering prosecutors who are legally trained rather than commanders who have no legal training to make these decisions. But their voices are being silenced by the military hierarchy, which only allows one perspective to come through to Congress and the public.
Well, and how much of this is just indicative of the constant power play between Congress and the military, where the military just doesn't want anybody who's not military getting involved in their affairs?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. This is really fundamentally about how much control Congress has over the military. And, according to the Constitution, this is a civilian-controlled military. And so it's really a question of how much now the Senate will stand up against the commanders who obviously do not want to see any power eroded because they think that that's a slippery slope. And they're desperately trying to hold on to their lush funding packages as well. So there is this context in which the Pentagon is desperate not to give anything away, and they already feel like they're giving up power in the other reforms.
So where do you think Claire McCaskill's opposition comes from? I mean, she's relatively new to the Senate, maybe by a year or two newer than Senator Gillibrand, and she's kind of taking on the role of the Hawks here.
Right. I think she is. I think she sees the military side on this, and I don't know. I don't have enough information to really speculate why that is. I don't know if she hasn't been speaking to the kinds of sources that I did within the military who are pro-reform. She said, if we don't pass this reform and nothing changes in the next few years, then we can reconsider it. But the survivors advocates community says, but that's too long. We can't wait another 2 or 3 years.
Right, and how many people are getting sexually assaulted every year?
26,000.
So that'd be another upwards of 75,000 people.
Right, and McCaskill has already said, she's also pointed out, look, things are improving, the commanders are really invested in changing this now, but that's because the public eye is so focused on them. What happens in...
Right, I mean, the 26,000 figure is within the current system. Imagine how many women are not reporting these incidents because of the way that they're handled.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Only 3,400 reported last year.
Right. Where do you see things going from here?
Well, a lot of it is tied up in procedural issues right now. Gillibrand currently has 53 supporters who have publicly come out for her reform as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act. And the Republicans held up that bill this week for a number of reasons. They wanted to put various amendments onto it relating to sanctions on Iran and, health care. And so it was hoped that would pass before Thanksgiving, but now it will have to be taken up after the recess.
And is there any hope in the House for any movement?
There are various reforms circulating through the House. It seems like Gillibrand's amendment would have a tougher time passing the House. And then the president hasn't made any indication of whether he would support it. I would be very surprised if it passed.
Well, and House Republicans blocked the Violence Against Women's Act. I hardly see them even bothering to take this up.
Well, I think that's... I would be surprised as well if it passed the House, but I do think the fact that there is such bipartisan support behind the amendment is significant. We have people like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul in the Senate who are supportive of Gillibrand's amendment. So it really does complicate a lot of our assumptions about what will and will not pass the Republican-controlled House.
Well, and how much of that is the type of Republican that would be drawn to something like this is the kind of Ron Paul kind of Republican who's against military entanglements whatsoever and sees an opportunity to perhaps weaken the military.
Yes, or if not weaken the military explicitly, at least to sort of assert their libertarian position, a sort of anti-establishment position, right. Again, asserting the break between the conservative the conservative GOP, the old school conservatives, and the Tea Party wing. So I think it could be used as another display of that power struggle. I don't know if their support for the amendment is really sincere support. I don't know.
Do you think Senator Gillibrand is getting a political benefit to pursuing this issue as well?
Sure. She has become extremely high profile through this whole debate, and but I wouldn't speculate that she's doing it purely for political purposes. But she certainly has gotten a lot of good press over this.
Well, we're going to have to keep following this legislation. I know that it's been a long time coming. Zoe Carpenter from The Nation, thanks for joining us and chatting with us about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
And as we get into the next part of this hour, we're going to be chatting with Elise Ho, good friend and president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, about the Women's Health Protection Act, which, as far as I'm concerned, we really need to get that passed. And we'll be back with her after this break. I'm Karl Frisch. This is Take Action News, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. So I bet you had no idea that Dick Cheney had a roast and you were not invited. Some of his best friends from the good old days of Bush Cheney gathered together and held a roast. And I wanted to chat about it with somebody I consider to be extremely funny, our good friend Andy Cobb, the satirist whose videos have tickled the funny bones of many people. And Andy, I apologize for that introduction. Thanks for joining us.
Carl,
they've tickled the funny bone of many people.
The comedic stylings of Andy Cobb have tickled the funny bone of many millions.
So,
how are you, man?
If you were at this, okay, first I want to read some of the jokes that were prepared and given. So, former Senator Joe Lieberman, very popular in progressive circles,
we love him,
is quoted as saying something to the effect that it's nice that we're all here at the plaza instead of in cages after some war crimes trial.
Oh,
zing!
Oh, it kills. It kills. It kills our hopes for the future. That joke kills. I think Joe Lieberman is the perfect guy to roast Cheney, because I mean, a roast is a comedic challenge.
Right.
It means you have to exaggerate shortcomings, the moral shortcomings of a person for comedic effect. Ultimately, you're saying this is a good guy, but we're going to blow out of proportion the misdeeds of this person.
I mean, it's basically comedy on a pinpoint, right? You can make jokes about an ethnicity or a religion or whatever, as long as people know in your heart of hearts that you're doing it from a place of love and that you don't actually hate the people.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with somebody who has so much hate in his heart, in his broken heart, what do you do? What do you do? I really feel for Joe. I mean, and I've never said these words before in my life, Carl. I really feel for Joe Lieberman on this, in the sense that as a comic, there's really no blowing up or exaggerating of Cheney's misdeeds. I mean, what do you do? I mean, blowing up Alderaan? How do you magnify his actual misdeeds? Which I think leads us to a real crisis that we're facing in this country, Carl. And
What's that?
I want to get kind of serious for a minute, because we're facing a deficit problem. And it's not a financial deficit crisis. It's not a monetary deficit crisis. It's a deficit of metaphors. and we saw that this morning when people are comparing the problems with healthcare.gov to Katrina.
Right.
And I think we're going to run into this over and over again when we compare the problems with this administration to the problems of the prior administration.
In fairness, though, Kanye West did put out a statement saying that Barack Obama hates people with junk insurance policies.
Kanye is his own metaphor.
And Michael Myers, by the way, said it's just fine in Canada. So, yeah, I mean, let's look at that. I mean, we saw during the hearings over healthcare.gov, politicians struggling to make, when they were, grilling Secretary Sebelius, the former governor of Kansas, struggling to make Wizard of Oz references. And now they're, likening it. This is, first of all, just the idea that Republicans would say this is Barack Obama's Katrina is hysterical.
Hysterical and outrageous. And we're going to keep running into this. If we try and compare stuff to the Iraq War, if we try and compare to Katrina, the terrible misdeeds of the Bush administration really are going to fail us in simile and metaphor every time.
But I feel like Rodney Dangerfield could have delivered this metaphor. It's like because they think it's as bad, it's something so bad that this is what they would do.
Yeah. You get still respect. I think that if we're going to search for a metaphor from the Bush administration, let's go to one that we can relate to, and that's Cheney shooting his best friend in the face.
Right.
And I will go so far as a progressive to say this healthcare.gov, the problems with the website are causing actual problems and actual headaches. So let's compare it to that. Let's say this event that's embarrassing and messy and nobody died.
Right.
That's exactly what healthcare.gov. It's Cheney shooting somebody in the face. And I want to put an offer out there today, and I'm very serious about this, Carl. If Joe Biden would like to shoot somebody in the face, because part of what they're facing here is a slow news cycle that's going into this. If he wants to shoot somebody in the face, I will step up as a patriot and as an American, and Joe Biden can shoot me in the face anytime he wants. I don't want to die, but I'll keep the scars and let him sign it. That is a news story.
That's patriotic, my friend. So,
thank you, buddy. I do what I can for our country.
Also at the roast was Scooter Libby, the Cheney aide who was convicted of misleading the FBI in its investigations concerning the leak of Valerie Plame's identity. And so Libby made a lot of jokes about his conviction, saying that George Bush had sent a note saying, "Pardon me, I can't make it." He also joked that Cheney's dog had urinated in a cabin at Camp David and that Cheney had sought a pardon, but Bush refused.
Scooter.
Yeah, I mean, for people that have followed it, I mean, a lot of people say that the point at which Bush and Cheney finally separated, when Bush finally cut his umbilical cord to Darth Cheney, was when Cheney came to him asking for a pardon for Scooter Libby, and Bush refused. And Cheney said that he was leaving a soldier on the battlefield.
That's right. What an apt metaphor. It's exactly like leaving a dying soldier on the battlefield.
Cheney has a lot of experience with leaving, with putting soldiers in harm's way.
Fair point. And I really feel like what a lovely metaphor for him to draw. Having put so many soldiers in harm's way and left them behind, to draw this comparison to a felon. And you know, and Cheney had a lot to be worried about. I think you remember that he was worried that that hackers were going to tap into his
pacemaker, right?
Yeah. Which I don't, and actually caused him to have a heart attack. So this was a legitimate.
And he learned this by watching Homeland.
Yeah, which I think is where he got most of his foreign affairs news. But I think there may be some truth to this, actually, and I wouldn't put it past Cheney to have souped this up in the wake of these concerns and actually gotten some apps for his pacemaker. Who knows? If he's got an app that between games of Candy Crush, he can actually go and screw up healthcare.gov and then go back to his Angry Birds game. It seems like classic Cheney.
I think there should be a Cheney edition of Angry Birds. Only he'd be doing everything he can to help the pigs.
Yeah, absolutely. Shooting back at the birds.
He's
swallowing his own filth.
The traitor bird with the grimace on its face. So where do you see things going from here? I mean, obviously, comedians have had a lot of fun with this and proving the point yet again that comedians are not right or left. They're after illustrating the craziness of our politics. Where do you see the healthcare discussion going?
Well, it's been interesting to see Jon Stewart sort of criticize the Obama administration. He's been considered sort of an Obama cheerleader for a while, and it's interesting to go the other way on this. But ultimately, we are talking about a website. We are talking about
right.
concerns with a website. And the same way that we had our fun with the demise of MySpace, and we had our comedic fun with when Pets.com went under, we're going to have our fun with this. But I think ultimately we're going to go back to the fact that if we're choosing between a screwed-up website and pre-existing conditions, we are comics, but we are also people who go to the doctor. So I think we're going to fall on the side of humanity on this. Dennis Miller maybe being the exception.
I certainly hope.
Being the exception.
Andy Cobb, political satirist, the maker of fine videos that make us all laugh. You can find his work at andycobbonline.com. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Go.
This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and
Say you want to go to a Big Ten college, but you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course.
Really?
Indiana University East. Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. And the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are federal student aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentAid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. We've talked before on the show about issues important to the LGBT community other than marriage equality. Although marriage equality is a giant issue, a lot of our heterosexual friends and family have no idea that gay and lesbian people can be fired in 30 some odd states just for who they love. They can be denied housing and all sorts of other things, and that it's even worse for our trans brothers and sisters. Joining me to talk about a specific case involving trans workplace discrimination in which a trans worker won $50,000 for workplace bias is our good friend Alona Turner. She's the legal director at the Transgender Law Center. Alona, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, tell us about this case.
Well, we were really thrilled to see the really high settlement that came out in this case, $50,000 for the transgender employee who was discriminated against. This case was filed by our colleagues at Lambda Legal. They helped this woman file an EEOC complaint after she was fired from her job at a grocery store basically immediately after coming out as transgender. She had been living as a woman pretty much full-time outside of work, but had been hiding who she was on the job. But when she finally got up the courage to tell her employer, "This is who I am. You've been seeing me as male, but I really am a woman, and it's important that I start presenting that way at work as well." Initially, they said, "Oh, that'll be fine. You don't have to worry about anything." But very shortly after she started actually coming to work presenting as female, she was unceremoniously fired, told that she was making other employees uncomfortable, and that this just wasn't going to work out for the grocery store as a business. They were concerned about basically customers and other employees being uncomfortable, and so let her go. But fortunately, she found her way to Lambda Legal's help desk, and they helped her file a complaint with the EEOC, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the agency that investigates and prosecutes cases under all the federal employment discrimination laws. And as a result of their investigation, the EEOC concluded that this employer had in fact discriminated against her because she is transgender, which the agency held has been holding for about a year now, that discrimination against people because they are transgender is a prohibited form of sex discrimination.
And that was a big deal back in April of 2012 when the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, issued basically a comprehensive ruling that gave transgender individuals sorely needed federal protections against discrimination in the workplace. Prior to that, a case like this might not have been possible.
That's absolutely right, and we were incredibly honored to have been a part of that. The case that in which the EEOC made that ruling was Macy versus Holder, brought by my team at the Transgender Law Center on behalf of our client Mia Macy, who had experienced actually a pretty similar set of facts to Corey McCreary in the most recent case. Mia had applied for a job at a federal agency, and they said she was a shoo-in, and she packed up her family and moved across the country, actually, in counting on this job coming through. But shortly before she was supposed to start work, she had been going through sort of legal and medical steps to transition from male to female, and they had offered her the job essentially when she was presenting as male. And then she called them and to say, "Oh, by the way, I need to let you know I'll be starting work as a woman, as Mia." And they got back to her within a couple days and said, "Oh, sorry, actually, funding for the position has been cut. There's no more job." But she later found out that, in fact, they had hired somebody else. And then actually the EEOC concluded its investigation just a couple months ago and found that, yes, it was completely discriminatory. The other person that they hired was far less qualified, and it was all pretextual for, they were really concerned about the fact that she was transgender, as we suspected all along.
Is there any indication of how prevalent this is? I mean, we're at the dawn of a new civil rights age where you tell most heterosexual people that LGBT people can be fired and, well more than half the states in this country, and they're shocked because our culture has moved so much more quickly than our laws have. And it's continuing to move more quickly for gay and lesbian, bisexual people, but not as quickly for trans people. How prevalent is this type of workplace discrimination for trans people?
Unfortunately, it's extremely, shockingly high, the rates of employment discrimination faced by transgender folks. Some recent studies have shown that as many as something like 94% of transgender people in a recent, really large national survey said that they had experienced some kind of mistreatment on the job simply because of who they are. And that we see that playing out in the really high unemployment rates for the trans community, which are at double the national average, and it goes up to 4 times the national average for African American transgender people. Really disproportionate rates of homelessness as a result. People living in extreme poverty, getting involved with, being forced to get involved with the street economies because they can't get another kind of job, and then disproportionate involvement with the criminal justice system. It's really just a terrible cycle of discrimination and further marginalization.
Well, and that's why I think the EEOC's decision to classify this as a form of gender discrimination was so huge. For years we've been talking about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in Congress, and several years ago there was an effort to remove trans protections in that legislation to make it easier or more palatable to members of Congress who might not vote for it with such protections. That was thankfully abandoned. And then this kind of leapfrog situation happened with this decision, which I think is outstanding. And you're also beginning to see, more trans visibility, whether it's in shows like Orange is the New Black or a show from the year before, which I can't remember. You had the Miss Universe pageant contestant. And now I read this really, heart-touching story from the newspaper about a California high school student who was elected homecoming queen, a transgender teenage girl.
Right.
These are the same types of stories that you read in the late 90s, early 2000s about LGBT people, where it was becoming more and more evident that a generation of people coming up the ranks of society did not have a problem with any of this.
It's true. I think that in a lot of ways, the transgender rights movement is about 20 or so years behind where the lesbian and gay rights movement is in terms of, acceptance from the broader society and legal rights. But we are seeing really stunning advancements in recent years, and especially, as you mentioned, sort of leapfrogging. It is interesting and strikes some people as, ironic, certainly unusual, that in the realm of employment protections, it is the case now, thanks to the EEOC ruling and a number of federal court rulings over the last 10 years, that it is very, very well clearly established that transgender folks are protected under federal employment discrimination laws, the laws like Title VII that prohibit sex discrimination on the job. But those same laws have not been so clearly extended to people who are fired for being lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So we certainly do still need ENDA both to firm things up and make it absolutely crystal.
Well, we need this to stick in a new administration, too.
Sure.
And, as we see these things move along, are there other cases working their way through the pipelines?
There are. There are a number of cases, that we're working on as we speak. I can't share too many details about those, but, we have one that we're working on where a transgender woman who works in a restaurant was offered a promotion, but said that in order to accept that promotion, she would have to start dressing as male, even though she was hired as female. And in fact, when she first started the job, she was told that she should wear more makeup because they wanted the, waitresses and people working at the counter to meet a certain sort of appearance standard. But then they said in order to be a supervisor, you have to be a man and appear as a man. So
absolutely confounding sometimes when you hear about these things. Really great news, though, in this case. A great resolution there. If you're just joining us, we've been talking to our good friend from the... I've completely misplaced your organization name. Can you...
Transgender Law
Thank you, the Transgender Law Center.
Bay Area.
That's right. And I want to thank you very much for joining us, Alana Turner. Thanks for talking with us about this important story.
Yeah, thanks for bringing some attention to it.
Absolutely. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and when we come back, we are going to talk to a man whose television ad in which he comes out to his Tea Party father, he's running for Congress, Carl Shortino, will join us, and he's coming out to his father in this new ad, his Tea Party dad, but not in the way you might think. Stick around and we'll chat with him after the break.
Education beyond high school, a path to opportunity and success for our young people, and the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream, because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentAid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Welcome back to Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. More about me online at karlfrisch.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Karl Frisch. That's KarlFrisch. Thanks for joining us on this beginning of the Labor Day weekend holiday. For those of you at home who did not know what Labor Day is all about, it is not about Coors Light and beach chairs, although it may be a significant part of your weekend. Labor Day in the United States is a federal holiday that is observed on the first Monday in September that celebrates the economic and social contributions of workers. It was first nationally recognized in 1894 to placate unionists following the Pullman strike, which was a railroad strike nationwide in this country. With the decline in union membership, unfortunately, the holiday is generally viewed as a time for barbecues and the end of summer vacations, but I see it for what it was at its beginning, a celebration of the American worker. And joining me to talk about the biggest story going on with the American worker today is John Nichols of The Nation. He's a good friend of mine, and happy to have him on to talk about this enormous fast food strike that's occurring. John, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be on with you, but Carl, what do you have against beer and beach chairs?
I have nothing against beer and beach chairs.
I don't see a future for you in the media if you're trying to be serious about these issues.
If I have to be in a radio studio on a holiday weekend, we're going to talk about workers, gosh darn it.
All right.
So,
it's a pleasure.
Tell us what's happening. I mean, my good friend Tina Dupuy tipped me off that in New York City, McDonald's, for example, they are providing people with a great deal where buy one Big Mac, get the second one free. So they'll give away free food to celebrate Labor Day, but they won't treat their workers with dignity and respect. How's that for
they're charging the right price for the food. But
yeah.
Look, here's the bottom line. The fast food industry in the United States makes immense amounts of money on immense amounts of volume. I mean, it's not like huge profit off every burger, per se. It is, you sell a lot of them. And in a calculus like that, the workers become the essential players. It's not the food, right? It's not that Coca-Cola flows real fast no matter what. But it's the workers who actually prepare the food, get it there, keep the place clean, keep it open, keep it functional. They're very much an essential part of this industry, and yet they are treated as very close to expendable. They're paid exceptionally low wages, full-time workers.
But John, we're talking about high school kids, right? They're just looking to afford the new Camaro.
I wish. Well, first off, you couldn't get the new Camaro on the pay that they get. But
well, you could steal one.
Well, I think that would be wrong. But this is the key thing. So they're earning way below poverty level,
right?
In places all over this country. Often no benefits whatsoever. Very few of the kind of classic protections you would want, and they're not kids. I mean, it wouldn't matter if they were kids. By the way,
right?
If you get a summer job, you ought to, you ought to make enough money to go to college. That's not cheap anymore. But the people working in fast food restaurants increasingly are adults, and they are adults with children. This is a very important thing to understand. In a stalled-out economy, we've had a little bit of growth in the last few years, and there's, it's not as bad as it was when Bush was finishing off and running us into a deep recession. But the fact of the matter is, we do not have a high-growth economy at this point. We're not opening up new factories and lots of new warehouses all over the country. In many parts of the United States, far from New York City, factory towns, small towns out in the Midwest, there are very few jobs. And so there are folks who maybe have 2-3 kids looking around. They've looked through those want ads for a long time. They end up working at McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King, and they're proud to do that. Carl, there are people who, I've talked to these folks, they will put in the fullest day and work as hard and do it as honorably.
They're proud to do this despite the poor shaming, and a term coined by my friend Tina, despite the poor shaming that they are subjected to. When we talk about these workers, all you hear from a lot of people in the media is if they don't like the jobs, they should go work somewhere else. They're lazy, and that's why they're in these jobs that they don't make money in, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they show up anyways.
No, they not only show up, they do a good job, and they work hard. And if I can emphasize one thing, they provide an essential underpinning for the rest of the economy, because these are folks who are there early in the morning to serve that coffee and whatever else somebody might eat in the morning, late into the night. So they're actually feeding people, doing all sorts of other jobs. Beyond that, they're maintaining public health and public safety. There's so much. These people are a part of our national economy, and yet they simply are not brought into our economic life. And this is the important thing to understand. The jobs at McDonald's and Burger King and other restaurants in a lot of places in this country, and also in a lot of retail, are no longer entry-level jobs. They're not jobs that people pass through because, the Chrysler plant isn't open anymore. And so, as a result, an awful lot of these folks are trying to make do, really trying
and a lot of these folks have educations. A lot of them have bachelor's degree.
Oh, yeah. Well, they went and they followed they lived, as Bill Clinton used to say, they played by the rules, they worked hard, but they couldn't get ahead. And they couldn't get ahead because, and this is where we link up all the realities of Labor Day, they couldn't get ahead because we're 20 years, Carl, now 20 years into a free trade regimen that promotes deindustrialization, that ships our good industrial jobs, good warehousing jobs, all sorts of other things overseas. And so in so much of this country, these fast food jobs are the jobs. Now, if these fast food restaurants didn't make enough money to stay open if they paid workers a good wage, well, maybe you could make some kind of economic argument that it just wasn't possible. But that's not the case.
Right.
These are some of the most profitable companies in America, and yet many of them are still pressing hard-working moms and dads down to $7.25 an hour.
Well, and in some places it's quite worse. I mean, if you take it a step beyond fast food, I mean, my mother worked as a waitress for my entire life. And in much of the country, people that serve food are paid less than minimum wage under the guise that tips will get them there, even if they don't get them there.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible calculus. You know, the fact of the matter is we have had this tradition. And one of the things that I did not like about I thought, by the way, first off, a lot of the coverage of the fast food strike was good. And I don't usually say that about our media.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is it got a lot of attention in the business press, at local TV stations, and it's because these were large demonstrations, hundreds and hundreds of people in many communities going out. So it got good coverage. But the one thing that was missing is sort of a calculus on how you begin to address some of these challenges. And the fact of the matter is, the best way to address it is with rapid increase in the minimum wage. And, you know, we've had presidents of the United States who doubled the minimum wage. That is it's not some sort of radical concept. And we've had substantial hikes in it at different times in the past. We need that now.
Well, and we're not talking about that drastic of a big move. I mean, we're talking about maybe bringing it up just north of $10 an hour, right?
Right. There's a good, well, the folks who are out were saying $15 an hour. And that's a very
But that's how you compromise, right?
Right. Well, let me just say first off,
I don't think they don't deserve $15. I think they do deserve $15, but it's a good negotiating tactic if you know that the sweet spot is somewhere between 10 and 15 to go for that.
But let's begin with just the concept of the 15 and say that's a legitimate ask because that gets them, you know, just above the poverty line if you're working full time, right? So that's why you ask for that. You don't ask for it because, oh, yeah, I want pie in the sky. You're asking for, no, a full-time worker get above the poverty line.
Right.
But if our society isn't ready to say that we respect full-time work enough that you shouldn't be in poverty, at the very least, let's get enough of an increase in the minimum wage so that when adjusted for inflation, it's as high as it was when Dr. King went to Washington for the March on Washington. This is an important thing to understand. If our minimum wage had simply kept pace with inflation in this country from 1963 to today, it would be almost $10 an hour.
Right.
Instead, it's $7.25. So Congressman Miller from California, George Miller, has proposed a fair minimum wage act. It's not perfect, and he'll admit that. But what it would do is take you to around $10.10 an hour, and then it would peg the minimum wage to inflation. So once you got there, those workers would never fall back as we had inflation. And it also, for what you just brought up, which is very important, it has a whole new set of protections for people who live on tips. Raises them up to a higher proportion of the minimum wage, has more protection for people working in the restaurant industry. It's a really good bill. And the fact of the matter is it ought to be discussed as not the end goal of all these demonstrations, but something that could practically be done next Wednesday.
Well, and in the short term, I hope, I don't see Congress doing much to help workers, but in the short term, it would be great to see states that have initiatives, putting initiatives on the ballot to do that with the minimum wage in their own states. But then also just put this around the necks of the Republican leadership. Make them explain every day. You know, we can't make the chairman of McDonald's sit in a room and answer questions on our own. Members of Congress can. And if they won't do that, we should be asking the values proposition of the Republican leadership every single day. Why don't you think that McDonald's, which made, I don't know, what, $2 billion last year, $30 billion last year?
They did fine. They did fine.
Yeah, they did perfectly fine. Why won't they pay their workers a wage that they can afford to live off of?
Well, and Carl, that's exactly right. And here's one of the great challenges we have.
And don't tell me because you have to be competitive. You know, at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, what's more important, making investors on Wall Street happy with another increase in your already huge wins, or taking care of the people that are enabling you to get there?
Well, it's also, we actually have proof from a lot of these in some of these low wage areas that restaurants and retailers that pay a higher wage actually are highly competitive. They do great. So this is really, the whole competitive argument is a fantasy that's been developed as a last excuse, or the argument that somehow this is going to harm job creation. This is not the case. These restaurants aren't going to close down just because they have to pay a decent wage. But here's a very important part of all this as well, because you're exactly right. Why don't we the people in communities across this country, states across this country, move to put the protections in, especially the minimum wage protections and general living wage protections? Well, there's a problem there. ALEC, the American Legislative
Right. They're doing everything they can to stop us from doing that. I wish we had more time to talk about it, John, but we're coming to the end of this hour. John Nicholas from The Nation, excellent as always. Follow his work at thenation.com and follow him at Nichols Uprising. This is Take Action News, and we'll be back after this.
Thanks, Carl.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
With your Working Virginia update, I'm Jesse Russell. Virginia families who rely on food assistance saw a cut in their federal benefits effective November 1st. Allison Burns reports.
Voices for Virginia's Children policy analyst Amy Woolard says that means Virginia families will see a reduction in benefits of about 5.5% or $36 a month for a family of four.
So with benefits only equating to about $4 per day per person, or about $1.40 per meal, that really means families and children will be struggling to make up several days' worth of meals each month heading into winter.
Woolard says most of the food stamp recipients in Virginia are children, the elderly, and disabled.
Food insecurity leads to greater risks for things like childhood obesity and other chronic conditions like asthma, anemia, pneumonia.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
What happens to prosecutors who intentionally ship people to prison for 25 years even though they know the defendant is innocent?
I'm Martin Espada, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Ken Anderson, the Texas former prosecutor and judge who decades ago convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. For 25 years, that judge and former prosecutor allowed Morton to languish in prison, even though he knew he had intentionally withheld from the defense evidence that proved Morton's innocence. For 25 years. 25 years. Unlike most of these cases, here, eventually, the prosecutor was found out. It's not newsworthy that a prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. It's the leading reason for wrongful convictions in America. But what is newsworthy is that here, something is actually going to happen to the prosecutor. In November, the judge, the former prosecutor, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for criminal contempt. 10 days compared to 25 years, and that's justice? Well, in a sense, yes. Because the answer to the question, what happens to police and prosecutors who intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence and cause innocent people to be sent to prison for decades and decades and perhaps life, generally speaking, the answer to the question, what happens to them, is nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union at aclu.org, because even in the Republic of Poetry, freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown. Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty. Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Postal Service is making one of the most substantial changes in years, expanding to Sunday parcel delivery. Jesse Russell reports.
The Postal Service is undergoing a significant change as it moves towards Sunday parcel delivery. The announcement comes after months of debate on Capitol Hill regarding postal reform, which included not expanding but contracting delivery by eliminating Saturday service. The program will start with Sunday delivery of Amazon.com packages and is launching in Los Angeles County and New York City. John Beaumont is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers.
We've just hired recently approximately 35,000 career carrier assistants. Now, these are new employees. They will become career after they've been in the service for a little over 2 years after someone retires. And as they come in, these jobs, especially the Sunday jobs, a lot of them are going to the career carrier assistants. Of these career carrier assistants, almost 25% of them are United States veterans coming back from the Middle East.
He said the addition of Sunday delivery will give the Postal Service an advantage over UPS and FedEx.
Amazon.com tried to work with some of the other companies, and they didn't have the network to go ahead and handle this and get it out. So it's not like this service was offered exclusively to the post office. It actually was, I understand it was either actually to FedEx or UPS first, and our network was actually able to handle it better to get out there.
Hundreds of taxi drivers in the Teamster-affiliated Washington, D.C. Taxi Operators Association are accusing the D.C. Taxicab Commission of stifling speech. The commission required written testimony in advance because some commissioners say it's hard for them to understand some people with accents. The union cab drivers say that explanation is abhorrent, discriminatory, and unlawful. The union taxi drivers were at the meeting to protest what they say is unfair towing and ticketing of cabs. The union wants D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray to direct the commission to immediately halt its practice of requiring written testimony in advance. 3 Democratic U.S. senators and 3 Democratic U.S. representatives have introduced the Women's Health Protection Act of 2013. Senator Tammy Baldwin says the act protects the constitutional reproductive rights of women to make their own private health decisions. Baldwin says it will, quote, protect a woman's right to safe and legal reproductive health services by stopping restrictive regulations and laws, such as those in place in states including Texas and Wisconsin, intended to curtail reproductive health services for women, end quote. I'm Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Since 2002, Workers Independent News has put worker voices and issues on hundreds of radio stations. But unless we raise enough money very quickly, that ends November 15th. So please go to laborradio.org and click Donate Now to save WIN. Madison, Wisconsin-based Workers Independent News was in the thick of the 2011 Wisconsin worker uprising that inspired the world. Inspire us now by saving Workers Independent News. laborradio.org and click Donate. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Karl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Welcome back. Take Action News 34 after. I'm Karl Frisch. The pro-choice movement is moving to proactively shield women's rights from right-wing attacks in the form of abortion clinic restrictions, fetal pain legislation, and demeaning ultrasound laws. Now a group of pro-choice legislators have proposed a bill intended to reaffirm Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Although the Women's Health Protection Act is unlikely to pass the House, at least right now, It is heartening to see pro-choice advocates on the legislative offensive for once. I wanted to chat about the issue and check in on the status of the war on women with a veteran advocate, current president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, and my dear friend, Elise Hogue. Elise, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Carl. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. First of all, congratulations. You've now been at NARAL for what, about 6 or 8 months?
About coming up on 10 months. Sometimes
10 months.
It feels like 10 years, but yeah, it's been 10 months.
Well, all these attacks on the simple human dignity of women and their right to control the destiny of their own bodies and their healthcare decisions, I imagine it's more than a full-time job.
It keeps us on the run, but we are excited about things coming down the pike and the level of resistance we're seeing all over the country, and translating that into, as you told your listeners, actual proactive policy measures to protect women and their families' ability to make our own decisions about our own reproductive destiny.
Well, and tell us about the Women's Health Protection Act.
So what this is a federal piece of legislation that would prohibit a restriction from disproportionately impacting a woman based on where she lives. So it's really modeled after the Voting Rights Act in philosophy, because what it says is if you have a right affirmed in the Constitution like we do with Roe v. Wade, you cannot have differential access to that right. So all of these sort of death by 1,000 cuts strategies that the extreme anti-choice movement is employing, be it artificial clinic restrictions that are forcing them to shut down, or waiting periods, or mandatory ultrasounds, those actually impact differentially women's ability to access the reproductive health care they need just based on where they live. Some of these are municipal restrictions. Some of them are state-based restrictions. And the Women's Health Protection Act would guarantee every woman who lives in this country equal access to the reproductive health care that we all deserve.
Well, and in some states where they don't necessarily, you're not saying that the government would build abortion clinics in every neighborhood so that women would be, the same distance. You're just saying that the government can't stand in the way of a woman's right to access these services.
Yes, absolutely. What it says is that, I should back up, because what we're seeing with the attacks by the right is an extreme agenda that they know they cannot pass at the federal level, because we live fundamentally in a pro-choice country. Most Americans actually agree that women should be able to make their personal health care decisions between themselves, their families, and their doctors.
And one of the ways that we know that is you look at the last few election cycles where Republicans, frankly, a largely anti-choice party, really had an opportunity to take back a majority in the Senate. And because they nominated such ardently anti-choice candidates who couldn't help themselves with the crazy things that they would say, they ended up losing races that everybody thought the Republicans had a really good chance of winning. And not just in the last election, but in the one before that as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I might correct you slightly on is that the Republicans as a party, in terms of who can actually get out of a primary race for office, are extremely vitriolically anti-choice. However, what we know from all of the polling is that Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, actually are majority pro-choice, and that's why the Republicans are actually paying a price at the ballot box when they run these extreme anti-choice candidates.
Well, and that's something that they're combating in a lot of different ways. I mean, Republicans overall are softening when it comes to gay equality, for example. But the party itself, controlled by an extremist base, is not showing any signs of softening. Same thing with women's rights to access reproductive health care. As this fight continues, obviously the states are an epicenter here. What are we seeing in the states? I mean, it's great news this past month as we learned that Wendy Davis would be running for governor of Texas. And we talked earlier in the program about the Supreme Court sending the Texas abortion ban back to the Fifth Circuit. What kind of movement are we seeing in the states that might give some heartening news to those of us who support the rights of women?
Well, we are seeing, anti-constitutional abortion bans, being challenged, and that's going to take a little while, and we need to make sure that we're caring for women. It's really critical that your listeners understand there is a human cost to allowing these extremists to control the legislative agenda. What we've seen in Texas with the clinic closures, and this is just the 2011 clinic closures, is that 7% of women who need abortion care in Texas are attempting to self-abort because they can't even get themselves to the clinics. This is a huge state. It's my home state, right?
Right. For people that want a good example of how big the state is and how much they're saying you're forcing women to travel for these services, it is further from the western tip of Texas to the eastern tip of Texas than it is from the coast in California to the western tip of Texas. It is an enormous state.
And so the undue burden of these women who have to travel is meaning that they're resorting to desperate measures, and that actually costs lives, it costs women's health. And so there is a real cost. What we are seeing is an upsurge in resistance, right? The tens of thousands of people that turned out to the Capitol to cheer Wendy Davis on was just the tip of the iceberg. We did a online telethon on Monday night to support access for Texas women who need financial resources to get to the clinics, and the outpouring was amazing. We're also seeing, by the way, good news at the state level in states like California, which have actually been able to expand access to abortion services by allowing trained nurse midwives to perform what we know is a relatively simple medical procedure. We've seen the Reproductive Parity Act introduced into Washington state, which would require that any insurance package that covers prenatal care also cover the full range of contraception and abortion services. So while states can be ground zero for rolling back women's rights, it's also the progressive states are being the beacon of what we need to do moving forward to expand these rights so that we get down to the basic values which underlie these laws, which is that women's reproductive freedom is ground zero for our ability to be full and equal citizens in this country.
Well, and to that end, do you see this being a defining issue in 2014?
Yes.
To say the least.
I mean, yeah, one of the things your listeners should know, by the way, is that 2014 we've got 36 governor seats up. That is a huge number that could remake this country, not just in terms of reproductive freedom, but a whole host of issues that we care about. And so what we actually tell our members all the time, and people are starting to get it, is that these state battles are all of our battles. And when we run on a proudly women's rights, pro-choice agenda, we see people winning, just like we saw Terry McAuliffe just win in Virginia.
Well, and right now there is only a single pro-choice woman governor in the country, up there in New Hampshire.
And we love her.
But there are several pro-choice women running for governor in 2014 and looking at races in 2016. That should lead to some good results, I hope, right?
Absolutely, and I will also say we love our men for choice. We've got some great male gubernatorial candidates who are proudly, or incumbents, who have always stood up for the right of women and families to make our own decisions. So I would keep an eye not only, sure we would really love our pro-choice governor in New Hampshire to have some female compatriots in that, and, we're all about the fact that this is not only a women's issue. We have a ton of male support. People understand that this is ground zero for reproductive freedom, which is core to the values of autonomy and self-determination that all Americans hold dear.
Well, and how do we get another generation of women, we've got about a minute left, inspired to take action around these issues? In the earlier part of the 2000s, it seemed that, the gender divide was lessening. It's now growing again, but do you think that has to do with younger women being tuned in on this issue for the first time because of the attacks from the right?
I will burst a myth that I heard coming into this position, which is that young women and young men don't care about this issue. That's not been my experience. As I travel around the country, I see young people on the front lines not just of abortion access, but fighting things like crisis pregnancy centers that are fake clinics that lie to young women in desperate situations. What I would say is that we need to open up our platforms and give voice to the next generation, but that they're out there and they are fighting the good fight every day.
Well, and what can we do to make sure that this becomes a defining issue that people vote on? So if you look at like the NRA, for example, 80% of the country may be in favor of certain gun control regulations. But in places like Colorado, where the number was upwards of 90%, people still lost in recalls because the simple fact was that there are people who are motivated entirely to vote based on the gun issue to keep regulations from happening. How do we make it so that men and women vote based on the choice issue?
One of the things that we've seen is by forcing candidates to talk about their entire agenda, you see that not only are the candidates who are opposed to abortion access and abortion care anti-choice, but they're anti-women and anti-family in any number of ways. They often vote against early childhood education. They vote against the kind of social welfare programs that help our needy families. And so one of the things that we see is we need to make these politicians own their entire agenda. We need to ask them the tough questions. They're starting to skirt the questions on choice because they understand that they lose. We can't let them off the hook.
And when they do get forced to answer the questions, the hard questions, is when they say the crazy things that they say.
Exactly. That's when they show that they're not just anti-abortion, they're anti-woman and
they're anti-reality. I mean, that's when we get to see their grasp on reality just crumble, and it embarrasses them. And even national political figures who consider themselves to be anti-choice have to step away. Elise Hogue, president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, good friend of the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Karl. Have me on again.
We absolutely will. And you can find their work at naral.org. That's NARAL.org. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. And when we come back, we will talk about the wisdom from the mouths of Texas Republicans with our good friend, Jason Stanford. Stick around.
Education beyond high school, a path to opportunity and success for our young people, and the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream, because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentAid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Welcome back. Take Action News. As we do each week, we are now joined by our good friend Jason Stanford to talk about the mouths of Texas Republicans, the craziness that comes forth when given the opportunity to speak. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Karl.
All right, let's get right to number 3 on your list this week. Lieutenant Governor David, I lost to Ted Cruz Dewhurst. Let's hear the audio. Let's hear the audio.
I can't think of one thing that I agree with him on. And the worst of all is Obamacare. This year, I was successful in passing legislation that stopped the expansion of Medicaid, which is Obamacare, and stopped our state of Texas from running the state exchange. But we've got to do everything we can to stop Obamacare, which is absolutely a monstrosity and will damage the United States forever.
So he says, with all due respect to President Obama, I can't think of one thing I agree with him on.
I think really the most embarrassing part about that is the lack of, creativity. I mean, can he at least agree that we're all Homo sapiens and that terrorism is bad?
No.
Or, we'll see. Okay, so now we have something to play with.
Jason, don't you know that science and the media, have a liberal bias, just like shapes and numbers and letters and colors and
shapes? He won't agree with the president on shapes.
No. I mean, if the president were to take his daughters ice skating this holiday season on the National Mall, Republicans in Texas would accuse him of trying to be like Jesus by walking on water.
Absolutely. I think they don't say, they keep bringing up that he doesn't use the words under God, and because they don't like to think of the president referring to himself in the third person.
Right.
So they have this weird perverted hero complex with the president right now. I think they're just intimidated by a African-American president. It just, I think they're really getting into some really deep stuff that they really need to go to therapy for.
He's obviously a fundamentalist Muslim who supports gay people and women's rights. Very odd. Let's hit number 2. This is Rick Perry on whether Republicans should change their primary debate process to have fewer debates. Let's hear the audio. Oh, we don't have the audio, but it was basically Ohio Governor John Kasich suggested at the Republican Governors Association meeting that the GOP would be able to pick better candidates if it held fewer primary debates. And when asked his opinion on the matter, Texas Governor Rick Perry boisterously agreed by saying what?
Hell yeah. Which, weirdly, was more eloquent than he ever was during any of the debates.
Right. I mean,
if he had ever been that succinct, he might have been the nominee.
What does it say about the Republican Party, though, that when Hillary and Obama were on the debate stage with Joe Biden and Chris Dodd and Bill Richardson, that they didn't have any gaffes that became career-ending, but on the Republican side, the many debates led to a million different frontrunners by the names of Michelle Bachmann and Donald Trump and Herman Cain and every other crazy loon under the planet, and enough embarrassment to lose the nomination.
Well, it's very similar to their theory of voting, that the only way they can continue to win elections, or start winning elections in some cases, is to restrict voting rights. So they're applying that same logic to debates, that if they restrict voters' access to seeing their candidates, maybe that their candidates will be more appealing. I cannot fault their logic in that, though. I think that is probably the smartest thing they've ever done.
Well, especially if they're not willing to change on any fundamental issues, and if they're going to be competing for a more and more crazy right-wing base. Our final clip comes from the worst Texas Republican of them all, all these years later, George W. Bush, on whether he is feeling less stressed these days.
Are you glad you aren't president now?
Yes, I am. Yeah. 8 years is plenty.
Yeah.
And Laura and I love living in Texas. Dallas is our home, and we're very comfortable there. We got a lot of friends there, and I really don't miss the spotlight.
Right.
It's hard for some to believe, but I think 8 years of the spotlight's enough.
Well, I must say you look much more relaxed.
No kidding.
No, it's true, but it's true. No, but I mean, I would see. No, but. I mean, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was George W. Bush reminding us that 8 years was really enough of his presidency.
It was plenty. It really was plenty. And I think we can all agree with the president that we really don't miss him being president. We're with George W. Bush right now. That's how far the Republican Party has come.
Well, and, he now fills his days painting and raising money for bigots who have a stated purpose of converting Jews so that they can hasten Armageddon.
Yes, but also painting shower selfies.
Right.
So it's bad. The bigotry is bad. I'll grant you that, Carl. But we have an ex-president painting shower selfies, and that's pretty
Well, it's
funny.
selfies by number, right?
Sure. Yeah, selfies by number. Yeah, I wonder what number, then we start getting into weird things. Let's just leave the president some dignity. But, I think it is a gift of absurdity to the world that we have an ex-president who is not building homes in the ghetto or, trying to create peace, on a bipartisan basis like Clinton and the first President Bush are. He's painting shower selfies. That's really funny. And I think we should all appreciate that. And the eloquence that he is bringing to this absurdist role of post-president is duh. I mean, he could not have planned that better.
I mean, this is basically like, what if Bubba on the corner had hit the lottery? What would he do in retirement?
Exactly. This is like if Billy Carter had been president. I mean, this is cool.
Oh, you got to be of a certain age to laugh at a good Billy Carter joke.
Or even a mediocre one that I just told you.
Right. So in addition to his selfies by number, he's also, like I said, raising money for this charity, quote-unquote charity, that seeks to convert Jews to Christianity to quicken the speed of the end of the earth.
Right. Well, 8 years in office apparently was not enough to cause Armageddon. You can't really leave that undone. So at least he has the courage of his convictions. I have my faith in Jews that they're really not going to go flock to their Hanukkah.
The thing that I found hilarious over the controversy surrounding the news of this was that it was shocking to anybody because there's a large segment of the Republican Congress that believes in supporting Israel precisely for this reason. Jason Stanford,
yes.
Democratic strategist, syndicated columnist. Thanks for joining us as always.
Always a pleasure, Carl. Thanks a lot.
Alrighty. And when we come back in the next hour, we are going to be talking with Judah Schaefer from the Constitutional Accountability Center about how the Democrats went nuclear, or as Republicans would say, how the Democrats went nuclear. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Stick it in the devil.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
OKLAHOMA, Oklahoma, no gays. Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. I am hosting the program. I'm not a singer. But I think it was back in September that Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin announced that she would not give benefits to married same-sex couples in the Oklahoma National Guard. The move was in direct violation of a post-Defense of Marriage Act federal mandate issued by the Pentagon and White House. And after some pushback from the Pentagon, Fallin dug in her heels, denying spousal benefits to any Oklahoma National Guard member. Her justification was somewhat warped, saying, "Oklahoma law is clear. The decision reached today allows the National Guard to obey Oklahoma law without violating federal rules or policies. It protects the integrity of our state constitution and sends a message to federal government that they cannot simply ignore our laws or the will of the people." Ridiculous. Joining me now to shed some light on Fallin's legal reasoning and give us an update on some other news out there is BuzzFeed's senior legal editor, Chris Geidner. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. So, Governor Fallin out in Oklahoma is doing what probably appeases a significant portion of her base, but she's not the only one that's looking at this issue and trying to deny spousal benefits to legally married same-sex couples who happen to be in the National Guard, is she?
Well, I mean, she's certainly not, because there are a lot of states with marriage amendments banning same-sex couples from marrying. The initial response to the expansion of benefits to same-sex couples by the military in September was not followed by like a dozen states. And then when Secretary of Defense Hagel announced that they needed to push back against that, a bunch of them did go and fall in line, but there are still like 5 states that have not. And despite the heat that Governor Fallin is taking for this position, it is probably legally more supportable than the positions that the others are taking.
Which is to grant benefits
to allow opposite-sex couples to register at state facilities of the National Guard, but not same-sex couples.
Because that's the way it works, right? You register at a Guard facility to receive your benefits. And
Well, what they're registering for is to be entered into DEERS, the Defense Department's basically ID card system, as a spouse.
Right.
Before these benefits, what happened was a lot of them had to be basically admitted onto base as a guest,
right.
And not the spouse. And so when they are entered as spouse, they're able to come and go with all of the spousal privileges that opposite sex spouses have had. But what the states have said is that that they're not because their constitution says that they're not allowed to recognize same-sex couples, that they're not allowed to even process these federal applications with federal funds at state facilities, and have requested or effectively required any same-sex couple that wants to get the registration to go to a federal facility.
Well, and that's, to that point, in some place like Oklahoma, the federal government pays about 90% of Oklahoma's military department budget.
Right. I mean, the bottom line is that, I mean, especially at the states that are not offering same-sex couples the ability to register in a state facility where opposite-sex couples are registering. I mean, there's literally no reason why they can't do that, and I think that the Defense Department is going to hold them to that. I think what we are seeing in Oklahoma, I don't know if you remember, back there we used to see this often in schools where when gay straight alliances tried to form, the school would just get rid of all non-curricular clubs.
Right.
Which it is. It's I mean, Stephen Colbert last night sort of attacked this position and talked about cutting off your nose to spite your face, and that's what it that's what it is, and I think in some ways has the impact of almost making the problem worse for opponents of marriage equality, because it's drawing in people who didn't care about the issue.
Well,
when a straight couple needs to go to a federal base to get their ID card, they're going to be upset.
Well, and to that point, it just illustrates another example of the problems that same-sex couples encounter as they move through this country that has no uniform way of recognizing their relationships.
Right, and we're seeing that now with states with marriage equality, states without marriage equality that are allowing couples to register on bases, etc.
Well, and this is, of course, Governor Fallon, and for folks that don't know, she is divorced, and it's been reported that, of course, she cheated on her husband before their divorce, so that's what you get from somebody who's claiming that they're doing this to protect the traditional marriage. But one of the reasons that we find ourselves in this position, Chris, is because of the hard work of an attorney that you profiled for BuzzFeed this week. And it's really a great piece for people that haven't really followed the march towards marriage equality. It goes back decades at this point. Tell us about the one lawyer who turned the idea of marriage equality into a reality.
Earlier this year, I had talked with Evan Wolfson, who's now the head of Freedom to Marry, and Andrew Sullivan about sort of the idea of marriage, and they were sort of two of the first people on the left and the right sort of pushing this idea, but they didn't get anywhere until a lawyer in New England, Mary Bonato, filed a lawsuit in Vermont and then a lawsuit in Massachusetts seeking marriage for same-sex couples. And although the Vermont case ended up sort of cutting the baby in half and creating civil unions, when they got to Massachusetts in 2003, 10 years ago this Monday, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court agreed with Mary and Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, which is the nonprofit LGBT legal group she's worked for this whole time, that the state constitution of Massachusetts required that same-sex couples be allowed to marry.
Well, and in the 10 years that have passed since Massachusetts became the first, we're now clocking in at 16 states in the District of Columbia, comprising more than a third. 1 in every 3 Americans now live in a state that has marriage equality.
Yeah, earlier this week, Governor Quinn of Illinois held a big, remembering the seeing how much things have changed when Governor Howard Dean signed the Civil Union Bill.
Right.
He was hailed as a hero for doing that step. And yet he still signed it in a private ceremony, whereas Governor Quinn, needing to burnish his credentials with the Democratic base before his reelection, held a ceremony,
big signing ceremony.
With a 3,000 person auditorium.
Well, and behind him was the U.S. flag and the state flag of Illinois and the pride flag.
And pride flags. There were. I'm glad you are a person who, like me, can appreciate the shock of when I first saw the photo of the stage setup and saw the governor signing a marriage equality bill with literally an array of pride flags behind him.
Well, and Chris, that's why I like. That's why I like the framing that you put on this profile of Mary Bonato as the idea of marriage. I'm 35 years old, and when I was growing up, and we've got like a minute left, I didn't. Marriage was not part of the equation that I saw for myself in life.
Yeah,
it didn't even occur to me.
This is what I said when talking with another reporter earlier this week, was that so much has happened in the last year that it's really important for people to understand that the last year would not have happened without the decade before it and the decades before that.
Right. Every piece has been, important to the next. And, we're going to be shocked where we are in a year from now. Really quick before I let you go, we've got like 40 seconds left. The National Organization for Marriage had a horrible year in 2012. They lost 4 state marriage amendments. And we've seen a bunch of states come online with marriage equality, and they ended the year in $1 million deficit. Tell us about it.
Yeah, they had gone from promoting themselves all over the place to basically spending more than $1 million in each of those 4 November ballot initiatives and losing them all. Most of their money came from a handful of donors, and the organization overall, between its education and advocacy arms, was $1 million in the red after 2012, and then they spent the beginning of 2013 fighting in Rhode Island and elsewhere, and it's going to be really interesting when we see.
I can't imagine that they're going to do any better. Chris Geidner, BuzzFeed, thanks so much for joining us and bringing us up to date on the fight for marriage equality.
Thanks.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam, because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call! CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. Karl Frisch here. Last week, Super Typhoon Haiyan, I pronounced that wrong for going on a week now, ravaged the Philippines, leaving at least 3,000 dead and millions homeless. While aid workers are still assessing the extent of the damage, we know that this is one of the most intense landfalling storms ever recorded. While it was wreaking havoc on this country, the young Filipino diplomat Nadarev Sano was traveling to the UN climate conference in Warsaw, Poland. In an emotional speech, he urged global action on climate change.
I speak for my delegation, but I speak for the countless people who will no longer be able to speak for themselves after perishing from the storm. I speak also for those who have been orphaned by the storm. I speak for those the people now raising its time to save survivors and alleviate the suffering of the people affected. We can take drastic action now to ensure that we prevent a future where super typhoons become a way of life. Can we ever attain the ultimate objective of the convention, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system? By failing to meet the objective of the convention, we may have ratified our own doom. We have to confront the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage is a reality today across the world.
Joining us now to discuss the increasingly apparent link between climate change and severe weather, severe climate, is Chris Mooney, host of Climate Desk Live and the New York Times bestselling author of The Republican War on Science, and also his latest book, The Republican Brain. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Karl. Hi.
Hey, so talk to us about this. I mean, is there a scientific consensus that climate change is having an impact on severe weather conditions?
It depends on the exact weather phenomenon. In general, climate change does worsen weather extremes. When we're talking about hurricanes, tropical cyclones, typhoons, they're actually all the same thing. They're actually still debating this, but when you see an event like this, you really just shake your head and you say, okay, I know you guys are still debating it, but I mean, come on. This looks like it might be the strongest storm ever recorded in the Northwest Pacific region, and that's the region that has the strongest storms anywhere. So 170 knots, as they say in the hurricane community, which is 195 mile per hour winds, doesn't look like there's anything in the databases to match that. So
well, and you say in your article that this super typhoon might have set a precedent for a Category 6 hurricane. How are the categories measured?
Well, they measure them by knots, and I forget the knots is nautical miles, and there's a quick equation you do to translate it to miles per hour. So basically, there's 5 categories. I forget exactly where the wind cutoffs are, but the beginning of Category 5 is 33 knots below where this was. So
wow.
You could easily imagine just creating a Category 6, and it might make some sense because there is a serious difference between Heian and a relatively weak Category 5. It is a very different atmospheric phenomenon.
Well, and there's still some debate, as you said, but how do those who believe that these, weather conditions are heightened by climate change, how do folks get to that determination? How are these kinds of events fostered by climate change?
Sure. Well, first let's go with what's absolutely indisputable, and let's go to what's maybe more disputable.
Sure.
So with an event like this, what the most dangerous part of a hurricane is what's called the storm surge, and it pushes a wall of water towards land, and that's where a lot of the deaths occur. That's where the tragedy lies in many cases, including this one. We know that climate change is causing sea level rise. There's no doubt about it. So that means that all these storm surges can penetrate further inland, and that's part of the impact. Climate change is actually part of the destruction directly through sea level rise. Then the question is, and this is less certain, is the average storm stronger anyway? And there's a huge debate going on. There's a recently published paper, a scientific paper, that says that there's more Category 4s and 5s now and less Category 1s and 2s than there used to be, and that the paper directly ties that to climate change. There are still scientists, I have to be fair and say there are still scientists who are debating whether they agree with that.
So while it may not be, the severity of these storms may not be worse, the outcomes of these storms is worse, which isn't disputable, simply because water levels are rising, which means that water is going to be pushed further inland, thus obviously impacting people more directly.
Yeah. The sea level thing is indisputable. The intensification thing is theoretically sound and expected to happen because, after all, you're heating the oceans, and that's where the energy comes from.
Right.
But there's still some debate, but it makes physical sense.
Well, and here's what's interesting. With the way you explain the severity question is how you'll hear a lot of right-wingers explain all of climate change, purposefully misleading folks as to what a hypothesis or a theory is, what the scientific consensus is. There is no dispute that climate change is real and that it's at least partially caused by humans, right?
No, that's not really a seriously open scientific question at this point.
Well, I mean, if you're a conservative, lots of things have a liberal bias, whether it's the media, science, letters, shapes, numbers, colors. I mean, they all have a liberal bias.
Right, and I'm aware that this is not accepted, but nevertheless, I report on the scientific community what they know, what they think, and I can tell you that this is one of the very established conclusions they are very confident in. It's really, really way up there on the certainty scale.
Now, do you think that it would take something like this happening in the U.S., something like Sandy happening again and again and again before people stateside start to think that action has to be taken?
I think we know without a doubt that mega events like Heian, like Sandy, like Katrina, they focus attention on climate change, and sadly, it does seem to be the case that those events make people care more, and then people forget, and then not a lot happens. And so, sadly, it does seem to be the case that these events, which are tragic, are sometimes what's needed to be agenda setting.
Well, and in fairness, there's a lot of money going into the effort to make people forget about this stuff. Chris Mooney, where can people listen to your show, Climate Desk Live?
ClimateDesk.org, and there's a podcast, Inquiring Minds, where we also talk about this stuff, and that's also at ClimateDesk.org.
And people can also find it on iTunes. They should also pick up a copy of your latest book, The Republican Brain. It's a great read. Chris Mooney, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and in the next hour, we're going to be talking about some of the craziest things said by Texas Republicans this week. You'd think we could fill an entire show. Stick around. We'll be back after this.
Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.